Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Masechet Menachot daf Lamed Bet. We are near the bottom, 4 lines from the bottom of Lamed Aleph Amud Bet, Amar Rabbi Chelbo, middle of the line, the Aleph Resh abbreviation. Hold on just a second. Let me share my screen and we will really get started. Here we go. We are in the middle of the discussion of the laws regarding the writing of a mezuzah, and so let's pick up in the middle of the fourth to last line on Lamed Aleph Amud Bet. Amar Rabbi Chelbo, Chazina Leila Rav Huna, that I saw Rav Huna do the following: Decharich la me'echad klape mishma, that he would roll the mezuzah, which is exactly what we do. We have the mezuzah is rolled from the echad to the shema, and so that would mean that the shema, if you were to unroll it, the first part of the parchment that you would see is where it says the word Shema, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So you see from the beginning. And the Oseh Parashiyoseh Stumos. And they made the paragraphs closed. Now, the Rambam's definition of closed is a little bit more detailed than the Torah's definition of closed. Than what we do in our Sifrei Torah. In our Sifrei Torah, it's closed means that the paragraph break is only a space of a certain number of letters, and then you begin again on the same line. Now, that's not in fact how we do tefillin. How we do a mezuzah. A mezuzah, the paragraph of Shema finishes, and then near the end of a line, and then there's a small indentation at the beginning of the next line, and that's where V'hayayim Shemoah begins. And that, by the way, is also considered, according to the Rambam, to be a closed paragraph. So they ask a question. So okay, so an open paragraph would be where you finish the first line at the very somewhere in the beginning part of the first paragraph. You finish the first paragraph early in the line when there's at least 9 letters left in the line, and then you begin the next paragraph at the beginning of the line, so with no indentation. That's called pituchot. That is called open. So those are the two different possibilities, open and closed, and between the paragraphs of Shema and V'hayayim Shemo, which are the two paragraphs that we have in our mezuzot. And again, Rabbi Chelbo reports that he saw that Rav Huna would do those paragraphs in a closed fashion. So the Gemara asks and cites another brisa. Meisvei, I'll ask you a question, because here's a brisa that seems to suggest opposite, that you have open paragraphs. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Meir, Hayakosva al duchsustus kamindaf, that he would write his mezuzot on the duchsustus. Now the duchsustus, let's go over just a quick understanding of the nature of parchment. So parchment is made from the hide of the animals, hide of an animal, and the hide of an animal can be split, sort of can be divided between an outer layer and an inner layer. The duchsustus is the inner layer, and the klaf is the outer layer. So he would write it on the inner layer, which is also kosher to write on. It's just not as nice as the outer layer. So, and he would write it kamin daf. Rashi tells us kamin amud shebisvarim arucha v'katsera, that it would be a long column that like we have in our Sifrei Torah, and it would be narrow. So he would have a longer, thinner mezuzah, and that was and obviously that indicates that he felt that that was okay. All right. And so as we turn to Lamed Bet Amud Aleph, and we get to the key part of why we're bringing this price. So v'osa rebach milamala v'rebach milamata, and he would make some space at the top of the of the duchsustus and at the bottom of the duchsustus, so that way there would be room for him to work, and you'll see why very shortly. V'osa parashuseha psuchos, and he would make the paragraphs open, not closed. So Amarti lo, and I said to him, Rebbe Matam, what is the reason? This is again, this is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar reporting on what Rabbi Meir did, and asking Rabbi Meir why did he do it? And Amarli, and he said to me, Hoel ve'ein smuchas min Torah, because although those paragraphs are written stumos in the Torah, they are because they're not next to one another in the Torah, meaning the parsha of Shema is several prakim before the parsha of Vahayim Shamoah. So they don't need, you don't need to have them be stumos, because that's not how they appear in the Torah. V'amar Rav Chananel Amar Rav halacha k'Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and the halacha is like what Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar reported that Rabbi Meir did. So my lav apasuchos, isn't this telling us that the halacha is like him with respect to the fact that you would do open paragraphs, contrary to what Rabbi Chelbo said in the fact that he said that we do closed paragraphs? So isn't that what we're talking about here? And so doesn't that doesn't that contradict what Rabbi Chelbo said? No, you're misunderstanding what the halacha Rabbi Shimon was like. It's only a revach. It's about the space. So the kama revach, how much space was there? So Amar Rav Menachot bar Yaakov, Amri La Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yaakov, Kimelo Atba Desifre, that it would the amount necessary for the clip for the scroll, because the nature of these of cloth is that it will roll up naturally, and so you want to make sure to clip it so that it stays open and flat while you're writing. And so as a result, you would have a clip on it and says stays taut. And so as a result, you need to make sure we don't want to have any writing that will be done underneath those clips. And so as a result, you make sure that you have enough space for clips at the top and the bottom. So Amar Leah Ba'el Rav Yosef Va'at Lo Tizbra Deki Amar Rav Arevach. And you know what? It had to be that when we said that the halacha was like Rabbi Shimon, it had to be that he was talking about the space and not the custom of having it be petuach, and not the paragraphs being open. Because Vaha Rav Islay Minhaga, because Rav says that we follow the custom, V'ha'idna nahuk alma bistumos, and that's exactly what we do. We have closed paragraphs. It's closed because we end the first line, the first paragraph near the end of the line, and we begin the next paragraph with a small indentation. And that is the way that you indicate two paragraphs are closed together. To Amar Rabba, and how do I know that in fact we follow the custom, and that in fact custom is really important? Because to Amar Rabba, Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rav, it was said in the name of Rav, so this is evidence that Rav shows how important custom is. Im yavo Eliyahu vayomer choltzim b'min al shominlo. You know what? If Eliyahu were to come and tell us that you can do chalitza with a shoe as opposed to with a sandal, we would listen to him, and we would then do chalitza with a shoe. But if he were to tell us, Ein cholzen besandal, Ein shomen lo. But if he were to tell us, you can't do it with a sandal, which is exactly what we do it with, well, then we wouldn't listen to him. Shikvar nagua am besandal, because the custom has become that you do it with a sandal. It is not easy to change custom within the Jewish community. The Rav Yosef Amar Rav Kahana Amar Rav Yosef reported it slightly differently, but the same basic concept. Im yavo Eliyahu vayomar ein cholzen b'minal shomin lo, ein cholzen b'sandal ein shomin lo. If Eliyahu told us that we could not do it with a shoe, we would chalitza with a shoe, we would listen to him. But if we told us that you can't do it with a sandal, we would not listen to him. Again, shekvar nagu am b'sandal, because we already have the practice to do it with a sandal. And we ask the question, what's the difference between Rabbah and Rav Yosef? Because after all, they basically said the same thing. And the difference is that mina lechatchila ika benayu. The difference is today, do we allow the usage of a shoe? According to Rabbah, who says that Eliyahu could come and tell us you could use a shoe and we would listen to him, we must not be using a shoe today. And we must think that really you're not supposed to use a shoe today. But Rav Yosef, who says that if Eliyahu would come and tell us not to use a shoe, we would listen to him, he must say that we would use a shoe, that if you did a shoe lechatchila, even lechatchila today, it would be permitted. And so that's the difference between Rabbah and Rav Yosef. But the bottom line is it shows that it is important what the custom is. And so given the fact that our custom is that our custom is to do stumos today. So doesn't that shows that in fact when Rav Chananel said in the name of Rab that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, it must be. It must be that Rav was speaking about only the space at the top and the bottom. He could not be speaking about using open paragraphs, because open paragraphs is inconsistent with the custom. And he would not even allow Eliyahu to change what is consistent with the custom. And so that must be Elalav Shema Mina Arevach. It must be that we're talking about the space at the top of the and bottom of the page. So Shema Mina, yes, you are absolutely right. That is a good proof. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar, you know what? You don't have to say that. You could say that when Rav said that the halacha is like like Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who gave us the explanation of what Rabbi Meir was doing, it's even in connection with the fact that the paragraphs should be open. And you know what, though? It's mitzvah la'asoton stumos. It's just the preferred, it's just the way that we're supposed to do it is to do it closed. However, what Rabbi Shimon was teaching us, v'i avdinu psuchos shapir dami, but if you do it b'diavad, petuchot, it is still going to be acceptable. Umay petuchot to ka'amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, af petuchot. And when Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is saying that that you could do it open, he means you could even do it open. And in fact, this is how the Rambam paskins, that you could do it open or closed. Again, our practice is to have it effectively be closed by having it end near the end of the first paragraph and begin with a small indentation in the second paragraph.
But we're saying it doesn't matter, really? You could do it either way?
That's correct. That's in fact how we come to the conclusion.
Is there a distinction between Ashkenazim and Sfardim?
I only can speak to the Ashkenazim. That's the kind of cloth that I looked at. I did not specifically look at that in detail. But again, given that the Rambam paskins that you can do either, I would expect that they probably do the same. But I don't remember being asked. Now I look Ashkenazic, so maybe that's why they didn't ask me. But I don't remember even when in Israel buying cloth. I don't remember being asked whether I need Ashkenaz or Sfard, but in any event. But that's a good question whether there's a difference. I can check that out. So, Lema Messiah LA, let's say that the following is supportive of the fact that you can use either stumot or petuchot because kiyotsebo. Yeah, this is a brisa that begins sort of with the word similarly. The preceding section of this brisa says that tefillin worn on the arm may be changed and made into tefillin that are worn on the head. But head tefillin can't be made into arm tefillin, and that's because the head tefillin have a greater degree of sanctity. So similarly, kayotzibo, sefer Torah shibala, utfillin shibala, when you have a Torah scroll or tefillin that wear out, ain osin mehen mezuzah. You can't turn them into a mezuzah, meaning you cannot take the cloth that's in the tefillin and say, oh, well, we'll take those two relevant paragraphs and we'll turn it into a mezuzah. And the reason is lefisha ein moridim b'kedusha chamura l'kedusha kala. We don't go from a lower sanctity to from a higher sanctity, excuse me, to a lower sanctity. And a mezuzah is a lower sanctity than either a Torah or tefillin. But what is the implication? Hamoridin. If we could go from higher to lower, so then osin, there would be no other practical problem with changing a tefillin to a mezuzah. But am I hacha stumos v'hacha petuchos? If according to what you're saying, if we don't say that when Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar was describing Rabbi Meir's position, that when he said that it was open, it means even open, well, then we have a real problem. Because if he just means that it has to be open and it cannot be closed, we have a problem because how could you possibly make tefillin into a mezuzah? The tefillin are closed paragraphs and the mezuzah is supposed to be an open paragraph according to the simple read of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in the name of Rabbi Meir. But and if you don't say what we were saying a few moments ago, that what he means by open is even if it's open. So doesn't this also show that it must be that Rabbi Meir means even open and not just open? No, not necessarily. Dilma lahashlim. Maybe the way you would use a tefillin or a Torah scroll that has been worn out in order to make it into a mezuzah is you would cut out the relevant paragraph and you would sew it on to another piece of that of the cloth, and then together that would constitute one cloth, and you would then finish the mezuzah in the proper way in an open manner. As Rashi tells us, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines up in the Rashi from the bottom on Lamed Bet Amud Aleph. The Dilma lahashlim, Dilma had daikinan hamoridin. That which we were trying to say, that if we did go down osin, that we would make and now you have to look at the Masoras Hashas here. Osin mitfilin mezuzah, that we would make from tefillin a mezuzah, that is im chasra mitfilin im chasra. If something was missing, meaning that you would just be sewing on this additional piece to the rest of the cloth, and thereby creating the full mezuzah. So that's the situation that maybe we're talking about, and therefore that's not going to be a proof. Okay,
So what are
so
they cutting out a piece of the tefillin and sort of patching it on a mezuzah
that's
part?
exactly right. That's exactly right.
And that
So
And then they put pieces together, and then they continue writing what was not part of
Either they would, yes, either they would continue writing or they already had the piece that was also written. Now, it's interesting because this whole thing is very complicated because you're supposed to write a mezuzah in order. So maybe this is where you put in the first paragraph and the second paragraph, which was written later. You're dealing with. So it's a little confusing. It's not completely clear what exactly this case is, but it certainly seems like the case is that you have maybe it's just that the first paragraph of Shema is at the bottom of a column and you have a nice amount of space beneath that, and you can then use the space beneath that in order to write the rest of the mezuzah. But the bottom line is what we're saying is that it's not taking the two pieces from the Torah and attaching them together, or taking the two pieces from the tefillin where they would potentially be together and using them and cutting that out. That is not what we're talking about, because in those circumstances, if we were to do that, then it would be stumot, and so and we want to leave open the possibility, even though we've already shown, at least for one reason, that the statement by Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in the name of Rabbi Meir, where he says that it's that we're talking about petuchot, that maybe he really means af petuchot. So we have one proof, but not a second proof, is the bottom line. But again, the bottom line is for us is that we paskin that he must be that it was af petuchot, because we definitely do stumot currently. Okay,
Well,
but the bottom.
there's a principle, I think, in Shas that malim b'kedusha v'lo moridim ken, right?
Correct, exactly. And that this is one of the examples that establish that principle. Now, again, it is not that what our read is not to say that you're allowed to do it. You're not allowed to do it. But the reason that you're not allowed to do it is what is key here. The reason that you're not allowed to do it is because of the principle of ma'alin b'kodesh ve'ein moridin. Exactly what you're saying. But but for that principle, the implication would be that you could do it. So that's what we're about to challenge again. Hamoridin osin. And so we're now 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up, five words from the end of the line on Lamed Bet Amud Aleph. You're telling me that if we could go down in Kodesh, and we would be allowed to make a Torah or tefillin into a mezuzah? V'hatanya, we have a specific brisa that seems very clear to say you're not allowed to do that. Halacha l'Moshe miSinai, tefillin ala klaf, umezuzah al haduchsustus. Klaf b'makom basar, duchsustus b'makom seyar. That we have a halacha that says specifically that you have to write tefillin and mezuzot on different parchment. The tefillin are written on the inner part, on the place of the meat, meaning the inner part of the outer layer of the skin, whereas the mezuzah is written on the outer layer of the outer side of the inner layer, on the hair side of the inner layer. So it's not literally where the hair grows. That would be the outer side of the cloth. And it's not, when we say on the side of the meat, it's not literally where the meat is, because that would be on the inner side of the duchsustus, but rather, again, imagine the skin is separated. If this is the outer side, becomes the cloth, and you're going to write it on this side. And the lower level is the duchsustus, and we're going to write it on this side where the body of the animal is down here. So that's the idea that we have. But the bottom line is that how could you change tefillin or Torah, which is also on a cloth, to a mezuzah? You're changing. You have to put it on a different material. No, lemitzvah. That is the way it's best to do. But it's not saying that that's the only way that's permitted. In fact, if you have a mezuzah on cloth, it would be fine too. V'hatanya shina pasul. But 1 second, there's a brisa that says that if you change the kind of parchment that you're supposed to use, it's not kosher. The tefillin. That's true with respect to tefillin. You're not allowed to write tefillin on desustus, but it doesn't refer to writing a mezuzah on cloth. Cloth is fine for a mezuzah. V'hatanya shina bein bezeh ubein bezeh pasul. 1 second, there's another brisa that makes it seem to say, because it's referring to two kinds of things, that it would be invalid by either one of them. So what's the either one of them? Isn't one of those two things a mezuzah and saying that you have to do mezuzah on duxustus? No, no, not necessarily. Idi v'idi b'tfilin. They could both be referring to tefillin. V'had dekasvinhu aklaf b'makom seyar. And the point is that if in fact you wrote them on cloth, not on the meat side, on the outer side where the hair actually grew, that would be okay. That would also be problematic. So you don't. It's not just that it has to be on cloth, but it has to be on cloth on the inner side. And when we say ubein bezet puzzle, that if you change either the material from cloth to duchsustus, or you change the location from the inner side to the outer side, then it would be not kosher. The ha, as we turn to lamed bet amud bet, de kisvinu ad duchsustus b'makom basar, and the so one refers to writing it on the cloth in the place of hair, meaning writing it on the wrong side. And the second one is referring to writing it on duxustus, wherever you write it. Even if you write it on the correct side, that's still going to be problematic. V'ibayasemu, or alternatively, you can say that what does it mean, shina bezeh ubazeh tanaihi, that shina bezeh bezeh tanaihi, that when you say, when this opinion, when we see a brisa that says that you cannot change either the tefillin to duxustus or the mezuzah from duxustus to cloth, that is according to one particular Tana. But there, and it's a machlokas tanayim. And how do I know that this could be a machlokas tanayim? The Tanya shina bazeh pasul. That when we have the baraisa that says that if you change this or that, it's going to be pasul. Rabbi Acha machshir mishum Rabbi Achai Rabbi Chanina. So Rabbi Acha, in the name of Rabbi Achai, the son of Rabbi Chanina, says that it's specifically kosher. V'amrila mishmei de Rabbi Yaakov Rabbi Chanina. And in fact, this is the Shita, both the Shita Mekubetzis and the Masoras Hashas changes this to Rabbi Yaakov Rabbi Chanina, and so that's how I'm reading it. So, and the bottom line is, some people say that it was Rabbi Yaakov, the son of Rabbi Chanina, but the bottom line is that that we seem to see that there's a machlokas about whether or not you make any change. And so as a result, it's a machlokas tanayim. So yes, you're absolutely right that there is a Tana that says that you would not be able to even theoretically change tefillin or a Torah to a mezuzah because it's on the wrong material. But that's not the only opinion, and so that's why we can say that the main reason that we don't change tefillin and Torah and a Sefer Torah to a mezuzah is because of Ein Moridin and not because of any substantive issue with respect to the cloth itself. Okay, so again we challenge and say, Ha-Moridin Osin, would it really theoretically be possible to change Torah or a Sefer Torah or Tefillin to a mezuzah if we were allowed to go down in Kedusha? V'habai sirtut. There is a requirement with respect to a mezuzah that you score the parchment, that basically you create lines on the parchment. These lines we use as the sealing of the letters. It's sort of like lines above. Vahab and the Amar of Menumi, Bar Chilkia, Amar of Chama Bar Guria, Amar Rav, it was all said in the name of Rav, Kol Mezuzah, She'ein Mesur Tetes, Psula. Any mezuzah that doesn't have those lines on it is not kosher. The Rav Min, and this should be Rav Min, most likely it's Rav Menume bar Chilkia Didei Amar, because again, that's the person that we just cited, and we're saying himself. So even though it says Minyamin in the text of the Gemara, it's almost certainly supposed to be Rav Manyumi. So Rav Manyumi bar Chilkia himself says Sirtu Shel Mezuzah Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. Not only is it required, but it's halacha l'moshe misinai. So doesn't that show that you can't possibly turn? Now, I will note a Sefer Torah also requires sirtut. So we're
Yeah,
really asking about tefillin because tefillin does not. So doesn't this show that you cannot possibly change tefillin to a mezuzah? Tanaihi. No, no, you still could because it's a machlokas tanaim. Titania, Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer Mishum Rabbeinu. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Tfilin umezuzos nichtavot shalom minaksav, that you're allowed to write tefillin and mezuzot without having to copy from another text. Ve'ein sreichos sertut, and they don't require scoring. So yes, a Sefer Torah requires scoring, but neither tefillin nor mezuzot, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, require scoring. And so, according to this opinion, you would be theoretically able to change from tefillin to a mezuzah. But v'hilchasa, you know what the halacha is? Tefillin lo baisertut, umezuzah bayasertut. But really, tefillin are not going to require scoring, but the lines. But mezuzah does require v'idi nichtavas shalom min aksav, and both of them, as Rabbi Yirmiyah said, can be written without copying directly from another text. My timer, why is it that they can be copied from another text without having to worry about it? Migras Greason, because they are so fluid in our mouths. Rehutim, it's fluid. Haim bipi kol adam. Rashi, sorry, I went to Rashi. Third line on Lamabet Amabet. Migras Greason, beginning of the line. Rehutim, it's fluid. Haim bifi kol adam, in the mouth of everybody. Ve'ain toen behen, and people don't make mistakes. Hilkach ein tzarech laha'atikam misefer acher. Therefore, you don't have to, draft them and from another text. You don't have to look at what you're doing at the same time. Okay, so
Well, so what's the point of that? What does he want to emphasize here?
what's the point that the
That
Rashi's
you don't have to copy from another text. So, I mean, what's the
so you could do it by heart. You don't have
so?
to. So if you are a sofer stam and you're writing a mezuzah or tefillin, we trust that you can. I wouldn't recommend it if this is your first one, but assuming that you do this on a regular basis. Unlike a Sefer Torah, you need to be working from another manuscript in order to do it accurately.
Now we said that both the mezuzah and the Sefer Torah needs sritut, right? So theoretically, then one could take from the Sefer Torah to construct the mezuzah, according to all the arguments just until now,
Well,
right?
again, assuming we ignore the
Right,
concept of ein maridi,
right,
that's
right.
absolutely right. That's correct, and so we've tried to challenge it and say maybe there's some problem, and in the end we have been unsuccessful. And that at least you're absolutely right. At least theoretically, we could go from a Sefer Torah to another to a mezuzah. Okay, so now having referenced the Sefer Torah again, we go back for a brief moment to talk about a Sefer Torah, and then we'll go back to mezuzah. So Amar of Chelbo, Anna Chazite l'Rav Huna. I saw Rav Huna. And now if we take a look at the Masoras Hashas, we're going to change the language a little bit, the little hey. De boy lemesav apuria de sefer Torah. He was thinking about sitting. He wanted to sit on a bed on some kind of what are they called? The movable beds. But anyway, some kind of bed that has had a Sefer Torah on it. V'chaf l'chada a'ara. So he turned over a jug so that way it could, have a nice wide bottom because the bottom was wider than the top. V'anach alei Sefer Torah, and he moved the Sefer Torah from the bed to this new stand. V'hadar Yosef Mita, and that's when he sat on the bed. Kasavar, he thought, Asur Leishev al Gabi Mita Shesefer Torah Munach Aleha. He felt that it was prohibited to sit on a bed where there's a Torah sitting on it. Upligid the Rabba Barbarchana, and this was an argument with Rabba Barbarchana. The Amar Rabba Barbarchana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mutter Leishev al Gabi Mita Shesefer Torah Munach Aleha. You actually are allowed to sit on such a bed. Now we don't paskin that way. We say that you're not allowed to. Ve'im lachashcha adam lomar maaseh b'Rebbe Elazar shahaya yoshev alamita. Well, one second, wasn't there a story where Rabbi Elazar was sitting on a bed? V'nizka shesefer Torah munach alaha, and he realized that there was a Torah on that same bed. V'nishmat v'yashav al gabi akarka, and he went down and to the ground. The doma, and it was as if Kamisha Hikishu Nakash, he was so upset about what he had done accidentally that he acted as if he was bitten by a snake. As Rashi tells us, Vinidmilo, one, two, three, or third line in the narrow lines, Mirov Tsar, because he was so aggravated, so upset. Kamisha Hekishu Nakash, he acted as if he was bitten by a snake. So, Hasam Sefer Torah al Gabi Karkahava. No, what was so upsetting to him was not the fact that the Sefer Torah, that he had sat on the same space as the Sefer Torah, but rather that the Sefer Torah was resting on the ground. As Rashi says, al Gabi Karka, Haya Sefer Torah Mushlach. It was the Sefer Torah that had somehow slid down. Deika bizyona yiseru l'kach nitzdar, and so and that's really a shame. That's a tremendous shame, and that's why he was pained by it. So that was what was upsetting him so much. So that is that, and this is a relevant text for the God forbid situation where God forbid a Torah falls on the floor, how we're supposed to be very upset about it.
So what is preferable here? If a person, he's got a bed, he's got nowhere else to sit, there's Sefer Torah in there, is it preferable that he sits on the bed and the Sefer Torah is on the floor, or is it preferable he sits on the floor and the Sefer Torah is on the bed? I mean,
almost definitely from what we're seeing, you sit on the floor and the Sefer Torah stays on the bed. We're gonna, the bottom line is that we say that the Sefer Torah should be above the person, not above the person's bottom, not below the person's bottom. So, and in the interesting question is when you see sometimes there are shuls that have like benches that include in the bench a Sefer Torah holder, and the question is those raise an interesting question based on this. The question is it considered the same bench that the person is sitting on? And so, in general, they're constructed so as not to, but you have to be careful because that's a potential issue. It's one of the many reasons that it's better for, arguably better for a person to hold it. Although we'll see that that's not so simple either. All right.
does this translate to Sfarim? I see sometimes people are very particular. They don't sit on a bench where there's a Sefer, a Chumash, or they pick it up. But yet people read in bed, for instance, and they're studying their Sfarim in bed. So does this apply to Sfarim as well?
I think that certainly some people would say yes. The question is, if you are engaged with the Sefer, then I think it's a little different than if the Sefer is just sitting there and you're not engaged with it and you are sitting on that same surface. So when you're engaged with the Sefer, so then the question is right, this is all about sort of the kavod that we're giving to the Sefer. And so if in fact you're using it, well then you're giving cover to the Sefer through its use. And so as a result, if you're on a bed and you're reading on your bed, I don't think that that raises the same issues. Now, again, I'm not paskening. I'm just giving my own rationale and
No,
thought
but
to
often, for
the
instance, people are
variance.
learning from Gemara and they have a Chumash reference to Pasukim that appear in the Gemara. So if they're sitting and they're using their bed, they don't have any other chairs, they don't have a table, using the bed, they have it on the bed. So now they put the Chumash down, they have the Nach there, and then the Gemara. They can't hold them all in their hands. They got three
Yeah, yeah,
Sfarim.
100%. So, like I said, if it's all as part of being used, I think that's different than a situation where you're just sitting on your bed and you're watching television and there's a chumash on your bed. Then you probably should not have the chumash on your bed. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so now we get a few rules. We're going to do three different rules regarding a mezuzah, and then we won't have finished all the rules. This is a series of five or six statements, maybe even seven statements of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Let's take a look, and we'll see the first three. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Ksava Igeres. If you write a mezuzah like a letter, psula, it is puzzle. And Rashi tells us, Kasva Igeres, what's the issue with it? One, two, three, four, five, 6 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Lamed Bet and Bet. Below sirtut, if you because you don't write a letter with sirtut, so below dictate, and not only that, below dictate b'chasrus v'yaseros keigeres ba'alma. In a letter, you're not going to score the line, so it's not going to be scored, and you're not going to be careful to write when it should have a vav or a yud, or shouldn't have a vav or a yud. You're not going to be careful about that in your writing of a letter. And so if you write a mezuzah like a letter, it's not going to be kosher. My taima, what's the reason? Us ksiva mesefer. You know what? We have effectively a gzerah of the word ksiva from the context of a sefer. Now, what sefer is it? Rashi's not 100% sure. Let's take a look at the next Rashi. Ksiva, ksiva. Again, now we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8 lines down. Now we're going to be 9 lines down as we begin the Rashi. Quote, ukatavdam al mezuzot, right? You write it on your mezuzot. This is the mitzvah that is in both in Dvarim Perek Vav Pasuk Tet and Dvarim Perek Yud Aleph Pasuk Kaf, that you write it on the doorpost. So that's one ksiva. The kasav, and we have kasav la sefer kritut. When it comes to a get, that you should write for her a divorce document. So a separation document. So that shows, again, the word sefer is written with respect to that. And so as a result, just as a get needs the certain principles that are written like a sefer, so too a mezuzah needs it. Inami, the reference isn't to a get, but rather ksov zot zikaron b'sefer, where we are commanded to write this, write this as a memorial in a scroll. This is in at the end of Bishalach, when we're
Amalek. Amalek.
I know that's what I was about to say. When
Oh.
we're right at the dealing with the war with Amalek, where Moshe commands Yoshua to write this down as a remembrance, and again, it has the word ktiva. It has the root of writing, and there it says sefer. So ma sefer by dikduk, just as the sefer requires its particularities. Af mezuzah by a dikduk, so too a mezuzah requires those particularities. Okay, so
There's
that
another
is
reference in the end of the Varim, Ketov Sefer Azeh, when it talks about the Shira, I think in Hazinu,
yeah.
right?
I was surprised that Rashi didn't bring that. I had not had a chance to take a look and see whether there was a reason why Rashi didn't bring that, but I found it interesting that that Rashi didn't bring that. So I don't have any a good
And also
explanation.
in Vayichem, It's in Benitzavim. There's a Ketuv B'Sefer Hazeh where it talks of, where if you don't
Yeah,
follow this,
that I would have thought that we would have that he would have wanted to connect it to a Sefer Torah. So it's interesting that he didn't do that. Again, I don't have a great answer for that. Okay, the Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So now we get to our second statement. Tula'a b'makel. Now this is a very I'm not 100% clear on exactly what the situation is, but you hang a mezuzah with a makel. A makel can be a rod, a walking stick. It's not really clear. So, and Rashi says, "Tla'ah lemezuzah ala pesach b'makel." You hang it on the doorpost of the opening with a makel, with a rod. There are a couple of different possibilities of what this could be. One possibility is imagine a walking stick with a space in it to hold a mezuzah, and we're going to see that in fact there were people who had that kind of walking stick. We'll deal with that in just a moment. But and you just instead of actually affixing the mezuzah to the door, you just lean the walking stick against the door. And so as a result, you now have a mezuzah right by the side of the door. Or alternatively, again, you have this same rod. What you do is you have imagine a single nail in a mezuzah, and you just hang the stick, the rod from that one nail. Again, without actually affixing it. Maybe there's like a hook on it. And so as a result, you just put it on a hook. So it's not actually attached to the wall. So, because it's clear that the thing that we're most concerned about with this is that we haven't affixed it to the wall in a somewhat permanent fashion. So, psula, it is pasul. My taima, what's the reason? Bisharecha be'inan. It needs to be in your gates. And this is not considered in your gates because it's not fixed there. So, Tanya Nami Haki. And we have a brisa that says along these lines, Tula'a b'makel, Oshenicha achar hadeles. If you hang it with a rod or you put it behind the door, we're going to see eventually, by the way, that you can potentially put it behind the door if there's no way to put it in the door. But here, you could have put it in the door. Sakana, you know what? You are posing a danger to yourself. Ve'ein ba mitzvah. And the way Rashi understands it is because you're not fulfilling the mitzvah. As Rashi says, right now we're in the middle of the narrow line. Sakana min hamazikin. You're going to put yourself at risk from the demons. She'ena bias mishtamerba. Because your house is not being guarded by the mezuzah. Ad shi'kavena b'tzuras hapesach kehilchasa. You have to put it in the right place as it's halakhically required. Okay, then we say, shall base munbaz hamelech hayu osim befun kodosehen kain zeicher lemezuzah. And you know what? The Munbaz, the people of the Munbaz house, of the Munbaz King Munbaz's house, they would do this. They would have their walking sticks hold a mezuzah, and they would use that and put it wherever they would stay. As Rashi says, hayu osim befun kodosehen kain pundak. Hainu Beis Shilmanin Bo. It's a inn. It's a place where people sleep. Over drachim that are going through that are passing through. So it's like a motel or a hotel. B'derech that as they travel. Maybe a motel is really a
Aksanya.
Exactly. And you know what? If you live there, you're not obligated to put a mezuzah up. That's why you don't have to put a mezuzah up when you go to a hotel. Delav diras kevahu, because it's not a fixed nature of living. Kedetanya l'kamim b'hatechelis, as we're going to see in the fourth chapter of Menachos, in chapter hatechelis. Hadar b'pundaki, if you live in an inn, in one of these motels, so then Eretz Yisrael, even if you're in Eretz Yisrael, Kol Shloshim Yom, for 30 days, Patur min mezuzah, you don't have to put up a mezuzah. V'shal beis Munbaz Hamelech, and those people who were from the King Munbaz's house, Kishahayu Mahalchim B'derech, when they would travel, Nosin mezuzah simahin, they would carry a mezuzah with them. The Tolan Otan B'pundak, b'makel, and they would hang it on at the inn with a makel, with the again nail rod, etc. Ad haboker until the morning, zecher lemezuzah, as some remembrance for there being a mezuzah. Lefisha lo hayu darin laolam diras keva, because they were never anywhere for a long time. They were never anywhere where that would end up being requiring them to put up a mezuzah. So as a result, they took a mezuzah everywhere. Elaholech hayam meir leir b'malchuso. They would go everywhere as part of their rulership of the kingdom. So that's statement number two.
We
Final
don't put a
statement.
mezuzah. We don't put a mezuzah on a sukkah.
Yes, that's true because that's also it's not a diras keva. In fact, that has to be a non-diras keva. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So finally, third statement for today and third and final statement for today: mitzvah la'anicha b'toch halalo shel Pesach. You need to put it in the airspace of the doorway. Pshita. Why are you even telling me that? Isn't that obvious? Bisharecha Amar Rachmana. The Torah specifically says it needs to be in your gate. No, Salka Daidek Amina. However, Amarava mitzvah lahanicha. Since Rava said that it's a commandment to put it, and now we go to the top of Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, b'tefach asamach l'rishos harabim, in the first tefach of Rishos Harabim that is closest to of the doorway that is closest to Rishos Harabim, kama de merchak ma'ale. I would think. Okay, so Rava says that it's good to have your mezuzah in the tefach of the house that is closest to the street. So maybe you might think that if that tefach isn't formally a doorway, maybe you should put it elsewhere. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe it's better to put it outside the doorway and not in the airspace of the doorway. So Kamash Malan, that's what Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Shmuel, is telling, in the name of Shmuel, is telling us, that in fact the mezuzah belongs in the doorway and not outside the doorway, if at all you can help it. And so that is the third statement. We have at least two more statements of Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, and then we've got a statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. So we're halfway through the statements of Rav Yehuda, but for those remaining statements, please stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Looking
Is he
forward to
referring to
continuing our
a?
learning together.
Is he referring to, for instance, a portico where there's a one walks onto a porch and you have the sort of the outer doorway, but the real doorway is inside at the porch. So would one need to put it on this post of the portico before getting to the doorway itself, in addition to the doorway?
That first of all, the question is whether that is considered a doorway. That could be potentially considered a doorway. So you have to ask your local Orthodox rabbi about that particular situation. But we're dealing with, imagine a situation where you have a some kind of hallway, that leads to the front door. And the question is, do you need, where exactly do you put the mezuzah? And maybe because of the hallway, you would want to put the mezuzah as close to the front of the hallway as possible so that you're closer to the Rishos Harabim. That's the situation that we're talking about. And he says, even though we have that principle that we want it to be within a tefach, the tefach that is closest to the public thoroughfare, that doesn't mean that you should take it outside of the door frame. It's the closest tefach that is within the door frame. That's the situation. And so if you have a long doorway, I have one of these in my house where we have sort of like a doorway, but it's like the whole thing is covered. It's almost, and so as a result, it's a long doorway. You want to make sure that you have the mezuzah at the very beginning of that doorway. But you don't put the mezuzah outside that the door frame, because it needs to be within the airspace of the doorway if possible.
So the hallway is before the door frame?
The hallway is, imagine the hallway in your apartment building, right? So maybe you should move your mezuzah not just to in the door frame of your house, but you should put it, especially if you live on the right-hand side, I know you live on the left-hand side of the hallway, but if you live on the right-hand side of the hallway, where the right-hand side of the door, which is where you put the mezuzah, is closest to the opening of the building, maybe you should put the mezuzah, outside the door frame on the right-hand side of the door frame so that it's even closer to the outside of the entire building. And the answer is no, don't do that. You keep the mezuzah in the door frame.
Uh-huh. But that even so there's a distinction between what would be a Reshuta Rabim, and Reshuta Yachid. In an apartment building, it's clearly Reshuta Rabim. You don't have any control over that.
That's
It
true.
would have
That's
to be
true.
your own house.
100%. We obviously it has to be where you would be allowed to put the mezuzah there. But in any event, the bottom line is that the thought was the havamina is maybe you want to emphasize putting the mezuzah as close to the Rishus HaRabim as possible, and the answer is no. You need to keep it in the doorway. So even if something that is closer to Rishus HaRabim than the doorway, you're not going to move the mezuzah. You leave the mezuzah in the doorway.
All right.
All right.
I'm thinking one other thing. There's an instant
Sure.
here when we talked about the svitut on a letter versus a mezuzah. That a
Uh-huh.
letter we don't usually put svitut lines to help. But I'm
Yes.
thinking back to my childhood. The teachers had us. We had lines on all sheets of paper so that we could correctly learn how to write the cursively and
A
the
hundred
print.
percent.
So there and when we were writing a letter, whatever it was in class, there were lines there to keep us in order.
Absolutely. Now, it's important to understand that the lines that we're talking about are effectively made with a knife. That they're not actually, there's no ink that's associated with it. The lines that you're referring to, of course, were ink-based lines. So that's the difference. We're talking about lines that are scored into the parchment. That's the difference between. But you're absolutely right. Of course, obviously today, lots of people write on lined paper.
Right.
When you think about a letter, actually, I did have some stationery growing up that had lines on it, but most of my stationery throughout my life has not had lines on it. So,
But
all
certainly
right.
you could make if we in I don't know, for instance, if we were using parchment or thick
Yeah,
material,
yeah, you could. You
in
could.
school they could make lines in
Right.
art if
But
we were
but the
writing.
practice is the point is that the Gemara is just talking about what the practice is. And the practice is that when both people, and again, Rashi offers two different effectively issues with writing a letter. One is whether the fact that it doesn't have the scored lines, and the second is that you're not careful on, when you write words like shalom, you wouldn't necessarily be careful to put whether you're putting the vav in it or not putting the vav in it, or you might write always with a vav in it, but sometimes the word shalom in the Torah doesn't have a vav. So you have to be careful. You're in a letter, you're not going to be careful about
Right,
writing the
right,
extra letter or not the extra letter, whereas in a mezuzah you need to be careful. So those were the two
right,
reasons that Rashi offered.
right.
All right, have a wonderful day. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow.